Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a Ukraine War Update Extra video, giving you the extra tidbits and information and nuggets to get your teeth into, to give you a greater understanding for the war and appreciation of everything that is taking place. I'm going to talk to you, well, first of all, I'm going to put some meat on the bones of something I mentioned earlier with regard to the S-300 surface-to-air missile system. So the S-300 was active overnight in attacking or being thrown against Zaporizhia city. Here is the aftermath of some missile hits. This might be just one missile, I'm not sure, but there were multiple missiles, I think, sent against Zaporizhia. We've also seen the S-300. This video, location and date unknown, but it has surfaced today, of a Ukrainian forces have captured Russian S-300 here. So that is the size of it on the back of a lorry there. A pretty big piece of kit and pretty well regarded, to be honest, the S-300. If we look at the Wikipedia page here, it's been in service since 1978 till now, designed over 67 to 2005. You know, you get your updates and whatnot. There are other versions. You got S-400. But yeah, the S-300 is, as I say, I think it's a fairly decent piece of kit it is now quite well regarded, to the point where I think when Iran was starting to get their hands on it, people were a little bit worried. They've, as we know from this war, have quite a close relationship with Russia at the moment, and they have been having, you know, weapons swapping, but they've been doing deals before the war in Ukraine. The thing about this missile system, and this was, I believe, built into the design features of it back in 1979 or so, it can be used in a secondary mode to do ground-to-ground firing. Although this has been known to be the capability, I don't think it's actually been used in active warfare for this purpose. So when it was used in Ukraine months and months back, I think Vitaly Kim down in Mykolaiv said, "Hey, we've got some proof that it's been used in ground-to-ground capacity." Then you know, people sat up and took notice, because actually this is kind of a new thing in warfare. Let's just talk a little bit about that. So Caliber Obscura here, who's actually one half of Ukraine Weapons Tracker, really great. Ukraine Weapons Tracker is a really great Twitter handle, but also Caliber Obscura has some interesting things. It looks more in detail at particular weapons. So this is way back in July, I think. Yeah, July the 14th. So looking more and more credible that the Russians are using 5V55 missiles, usually used with older S-300 PS SAM systems, as ballistic missiles to hit Kharkiv and Mykolaiv. Note, contrary to Russian claims, the ground-to-ground role is a recognized function of the S-300, even if inaccurate. So I don't know whether the Russians were at the time claiming, oh, it's not S-300s because you can't use them for ground-to-ground, but in fact they knew you could, and they had been. So he goes on to talk about it in some depth here, looking at the evidence that these missiles had been used in ground-to-ground attacks. Of course, now we fully accept that, and it's like, oh yeah, S-300. But actually, back in July, this was a relatively new idea. It had not been reported on much before. So a few interesting links that he throws in, but this statement is a particularly poignant one. Difficult to overstate the contrast here between M31A1 Gimler's missile with a CEP, circle error probable, of about 5 meters at an 85-kilometer range. So in other words, kind of like HIMARS and equivalent, your Gimlers, your guided multiple launch rocket systems. So you know, fairly pinpoint accuracy at 85-kilometer range, and yeeting a SAM 40 kilometers with a village-sized CEP. So he's saying that, like, using an S-300 in its role as a ground-to-ground weapon has a huge CEP, so massively inaccurate. And then that's why you look at footage like this and wonder, was that really the target? We've got a bunch of residential buildings, as according to the Ukrainians, might not be, of course. Is that really what they're aiming for? or was that indeed a military target and the Ukrainians are saying it's a civilian? But either way, there's a bit of lack of clarity there, and it could well be that, hey, these things are pretty inaccurate in their secondary function. They're decent surface-to-air missiles, but they're less capable as ground to ground. I mean, they'll go from A to somewhere near B. So that bit's fine, but it's the accuracy that's a bit of a problem. So anyway, Calibre Obscura says, but I'm sure that we can say both sides are bad still. The idea that, collateral damage and terrible stuff, both sides are just as bad as each other. No, actually, Ukraine are using really, really accurate missiles to do pinpoint military targets, and Russia are throwing secondary mode ballistic missiles at potentially military targets, but fully in the knowledge that, hey, it could go anywhere within a 300-meter radius, or maybe even more. So yeah, interesting stuff. So one of the articles that Calibre Obscura points to is this Drive article, the Drive article, the war zone. Russia now firing S-300 surface-to-air missiles at land targets in Ukraine. Official. So this was a new thing, and they said that in this article they say actually this is something that the Western media is not reporting on before. So this is a new thing. And yeah, just this, I'll put a link to this article in the description. It is, if you want a bit more information on, how these have been used, so on and so forth, then this is decent. It points to a Belarusian article where they actually did some testing on this in the ground-to-ground capacity. So the ability of the S-300 to engage targets on the ground has barely been reported in Western sources, although an article that was published by the Belarusian Noviny news website in 2011 provides details. According to this account, the Belarusian military tested its S-300 air defense systems against, quote, important ground targets on the territory of a potential enemy during an exercise in the same year. Belarusian officials claimed that this was the first time that the country had experimented with this capability, which allows an, quote, adapted S-300 to destroy ground targets tens of kilometers from firing positions. So what's interesting here is we've got tens of kilometers as opposed to particularly, as opposed to longer range. And I don't know whether they have to adapt the S-300 missile, adapt the system. What is being adapted here in order that happens? At least from the Drive article. We'll go to the original source in a second. However, as the article points out, quote, the possibility of hitting stationary ground targets was originally incorporated by the developers into the design of the S-300 air defense system adopted for service in 1979, as well as all its subsequent modifications. In other words, when the Russians say, "Oh, it can't be us. We don't fire these at ground targets because they're not designed for that," actually, they would have known full well that was part of the design criteria. At the time, Belarus was known to use S-300 PS version of the system introduced in the mid-1980s, and which uses 5 V-55R missiles, with a maximum engagement range of up to 56 miles against aerial targets. The Noviny article states that the maximum range of the Belarusian S-300 against ground targets is 75 miles, being limited by the guidance system rather than the propulsion. That's something I mentioned earlier. I don't know whether there are other missiles they can use that can go further than 75 miles, but it could be that is the maximum range of these S-300s. And this is the S-300 Belarusian article. S-300s are capable of hitting ground targets, but the Belarusians did not teach them this. In other words, it was part of the design feature. I guess that's what the headline means. Obviously, this is a Google translation of the original Russian article. And they talk about how, for them, it's all about Poland and Poland providing a threat to them, and them needing to be able to use these basically against the Polish. What we must also remember is that of all the missile stocks that Russia have, in terms of cruise missiles and things they're sending in their wave saturation bombing attacks against Ukraine, they have the most S-300 missiles. So they've got 8,000 plus of these. So if they've run out of cruise missiles or run very short of them, you can rest assured that you'll see an uptick in these missiles being fired. In fact, with the saturation bombing attacks, these have been fired as well. Now, what is, I think, important to note of these is that these are quite difficult to take out as installations, the S-300, and B, I have a feeling their missiles are quite difficult to take down with surface-to-air missile defense systems. So cruise missiles are relatively easy, I guess, to take out the sky, but S-300s might be less easy than the cruise. Now, on this, the SOFREP military grade content website has an article from 2016 on Iran getting hold of the S-300, saying Iran has the S-300 SAM and it's not good. This is what I was talking about earlier about, being a bit of a challenge to hit this and Iran having these. So how can you defeat it? It's an advanced weapon system that is difficult to jam or spoof. Defeating the S-300 requires a combination of manned aircraft with various capabilities as well as standoff munitions. Um, the US, quote, this is a quote from an expert, the US can take on an S-300 head-to-head, but this becomes the alpha target. It has to go before anything else happens, he said. So this is talking about SEAD, suppression of enemy air defense. You've got to take these out first. And it takes a lot of effort to get it, he says. The greater concern might be the lack of ability regional militaries have to go against such an advanced system. So this is in terms of Arab and Israeli militaries, he says, do not now have the capability to reliably defeat the S-300 with conventional means. That is particularly true of Iranian reports that Russia is delivering a more advanced version of the system are accurate. None of our allies is even remotely in the game on this, said Harmer. None of the GCC countries have any idea how to handle this. So the S-300, but at least back in 2016, was seen as a really big threat. Harmer says regional militaries will need to purchase the most advanced US airframes with SEAD and stealth technology and standoff weaponry. The ability to strike deep into Iran may be limited if they don't have these capabilities. The end result is they don't purchase advanced weaponry, may mean that Iran has eliminated any chance of regional deterrence against it and its nuclear program. Fascinating. And in fact, there was another article I was reading from Defense UA, Defense Express here. Can Ukraine massively strike Russia's S-300 SAMs with HARM missiles? And this was, I think, basing itself on a Defense Romania article talking about, whether HARM missiles are any good against the S-300. So, I mean, they have to use, the best, which the Americans have provided HARM missiles. I don't know whether it's just the Americans. So one hopes that these kind of missiles, which we know the Ukrainians have been using, I've shown you footage of them literally firing off these missiles from their fixed-wing aircraft. These will hopefully be useful against SAM systems, but actually it's just as important to be able to knock the missiles out of the sky. And I haven't found yet anyway, there's only so many hours in a day, any decent information on how easy it is to take the S-300s out of the sky. As I said earlier, I think I've read somewhere that they are difficult to shoot out of the sky. So S-300s are a problem. Anyway, moving on to something completely different. Now for something completely different. Here's some footage of a gunfight in the Dnipro. I have no idea who's on this boat, probably Ukrainians, but might not be. Looks really hairy here, and lots of machine gun rounds going into the water. Just, yeah. Wouldn't like to be in that boat. Looks like they're a sitting duck. Anyway, with that, I don't know whether that's at night or not. Who knows? I don't think so. But there you go. Some footage of a helicopter. I always like a bit of aerial footage. So I'm going to just share this with you. This is given by the Czech Republic, Czechia, Ukrainian Mi-24 V helicopter, and they've given 4 of these to Ukraine, and this is one of them in action. So yeah, bit of a few of them in action. Bit of aerial helicopter footage. In fact, there's some other footage of a couple of Ukrainian helicopters doing some rocket sorties against positions in Bakhmut. Now this isn't too much of a problem, but this just gives you I don't know where this is. It says east in the east, battlefield in the east. It looks fairly like it could be Marinka. Marinka looks pretty apocalyptic. I mean, just look at this. This footage is just a really fascinating insight into the hellscapes that are the Ukrainian battlefields in many places along the front line. Um, just there's seems to be such a lack of color, a lack of life in terms of vegetation, so on and so forth. Absolute destruction just everywhere. It just the only thing to do with these is absolutely bulldoze entire towns, possibly cities, and just start again. Absolutely start again. Which would be interesting from a design point of view. Could you create cities that are purpose built and therefore way more efficient and better places to live? You could really put some thought into rebuilding Ukraine so it can become a landmark country in terms of building, design, and building for the future, making places future proof. If you're pretty sure it's not going to be attacked again, I mean, fingers crossed, if this all ends well, and you get a chance, it's like playing Sin City or something. It is a chance to start again with a city, with a whole network of towns and cities, and to put absolute the best thought and the best design into creating them, so that they are just really effective, really efficient, really, I don't know, environmentally sustainable. All these things are really quality places to live. um I don't know whether that will be top of the agenda. And now I'm going to sort of finish off with no, I'm going to go here first and then finish off with that in a second, which is Ukraine has to spend on cheap Iranian drone rockets about 7 times as much to take them out the sky at the moment using the rockets they are. And I talked about this previously. This is a New York Times article, but basically a lot of the rockets that they're using to shoot the drones out of the sky. The drones cost about $20,000. The rockets generally cost about $140,000, and some of the NASAMS ones maybe $500,000, which is even more than 7 times as much. Just wow! So that's 25 times as much, isn't it? So there is a real asymmetry here to the defense against these drones. This is why things like the Gepards are so important, because that's a low tech, low cost way of taking them out of the sky. But if you have to use these missiles, which at the end of the day, if they get close enough, you have to use these surface to air missiles, then it just requires a massive expenditure. And also the supply of these, they don't have endless supplies of these. These need to be manufactured and then sent over to Ukraine. And it could be that Russia is saying, right, we've got 1,500 Iranian drones. I don't really give a toss if none of these reach their target. Let's just saturate the airspace with drones, let them use up all their missiles, and then when we've done that, we're going to send over wave after wave of cruise missiles. So that could be a really decent tactic for the Russians to use. I don't know if that's what they're doing. It seems to be what Zelensky was claiming the other night in one of his in his Monday night address, I think it was, which is they are trying to exhaust our energy, but also our surface-to-air missile stocks. So there you go. Noel Reports is one of my main sources. He's done a collaboration with a French journalist, or a set of French journalists, French newspaper Les Echos, and they did a bunch of footage on the front line in Bakhmut, and I think this is just well worth having a look at. Some good insight into what Bakhmut looks like, what the troops in Bakhmut are doing. I mean, again, I do like to show you these because it gives you an idea of the ramifications of war. Again, this place is pretty much going to have to be flattened. What are you going to do with these shells of houses? And that's coming into Bakhmut. There's a dog just randomly on the road there, as you would expect. That I actually saw listened to a segment in the Ukraine the Latest podcast, where there's a charity working really hard to work around pets and rehoming pets and giving food to stray dogs and stuff like that. So yeah, anyway, next part here says on the 29th, Guillaume and a group of journalists would meet the battalion to film their operations. While heading into Bakhmut, they'd passed a Ukrainian T-72B. Approaching Bakhmut, artillery fire could be heard from a distance. The group drove into Bakhmut from the west near Ivanivska. So again, just interesting footage. I think it's just worth showing stuff like this. Interesting amount of contact ERA there. So all of this is explosive armor, ERA. Oh, I didn't put that on my explosive reactive armor. So what this does, this is basically plastic explosives, if you like, packed on the side of tanks. And when a projectile hits a tank, it explodes, forcing the projectile back, and so the projectile can't penetrate into the tank. There you go. The road towards Bakhmut was calm, but once they entered Bakhmut, outgoing artillery and MLRS fire could be heard. The further they progressed into the city, more destruction was visible. Most buildings were damaged, neighborhoods are full of trash, local services have stopped working. And, it's a bit of a ghost town, as you can imagine. I mean, when you're doing work like that, you must be thinking, I'm going into pretty much a war zone where there is a massive amount of artillery and ordnance flying around. What is a percentage chance I'm going to die today? Just like, I don't think that now. Like, I'll wake up, it's a Wednesday morning, and do some videos and do my day job later, and then I'll finish my job, and then I've got a couple of hour interview, which you guys should check out with Dr. Garen Geddes, which would be about Ukraine. But anyway, I don't think, and considering all that, there's a 16% chance I'm going to die today. Whereas, like, if you're a soldier, that's obviously at the forefront. I mean, every day, and even as a journalist going into these places, wow. Around 7,500 to 12,500 people still live in Bakhmut, according to the firefighters they spoke to. That's a huge amount, considering most of them live in basements where there is no water, gas, and electricity. Once into the city centre, the outgoing and incoming artillery and small arms became more noticeable.
Yeah, small arms fire.
Can tell by her body language that she's pretty nervous there, and absolutely understandably so. Once they arrived at the location, soldiers informed them that the building could potentially be hit. It created a tense feeling, but the building was solid enough and had basements. They had joined the drone operators and got an insight into how they operate at the front. Here, a drone guy is, putting it all together. The next video commentary says, they showed us how they observed Russian infantry on the eastern outskirts of the city in the direction of Pokrovska and passed on this information to the artillery crew. After they passed on information, a 2S7 Pion, so that's a howitzer, and later an AHS Crab directly fired on enemy positions. So these guys are the eyes and eyes and ears, if you like, of artillery. And what I've heard is that they are actually running low. There's just a huge demand for these drones. These drones have a very short life expectancy. I gave you the stats recently. Is it for some of them, these smaller ones? I don't know. Less than 6 operations, and they'll be lost. But it may even be less than that. Yes, I remember 6 being the average. But I could be wrong. That could be the larger drones. I don't know, like the Bayraktar. But either way, drone life expectancy is very short, and so they just go through them. If you're thinking, though, these drones are basically going to be constantly up there, come back, recharge, up again, back, recharge, up again. They're going to be used all the time. So they're going through multiple drones a day. That's they have a high requirement. Ukrainian soldier Leonid was flying the drone while Duke was coordinating with the artillery crew. According to Leonid, the soldiers they are facing are mostly from Wagner. In this video, you can see a direct artillery hit on Wagner positions just after the coordinates were passed on. So you can see the, all of the IT here, and how they interact with it and how they interact with the artillery crews. After they stayed with them a couple of hours, it was time to leave. Through the center, they exited west. Again, situation in the city felt tense and grim. Sometimes you see locals on their bikes carrying water or personal belongings, but overall, it's eerily quiet. After they left Bakhmut, another unit was visited. They talked to a Ukrainian soldier called Alexander. He said that they were grateful for the support from Ukraine's partners as the artillery is working very well. However, he says they do not have enough drones at the moment, and that's what I was sort of referring to. In general, the mood is very good. The commander described the situation as difficult but under control. These men fighting are the absolute heroes and won't give up. So on and so forth. So I just thought that was really interesting footage. Just it gives you an insight into Bakhmut, at least into the center of Bakhmut. Again, I talk about the equipment. The equipment on Ukrainian soldiers always appears to be pretty decent in comparison to what I see on Russian, at least the Russian mobilized soldiers, who appear to be given very poor equipment. Some Russian bot did say, well, how can they end up killing so many Ukrainians? Like, yeah, they have guns and there's artillery, but their general equipment is just poor. Just the quality of the clothing, um, the kind of kit, their loadout is just much more sparser than the Ukrainian equivalent. Anyway, there you go. I'm going to do an extra one on the Russian hit of the one that was caught live on French TV, just to do a bit of analysis a bit later. And I'm also going to be doing a live interview with a fellow Ukrainian a YouTuber who deals with Ukraine. He's a conservative Christian. I'm a liberal atheist. Why do we agree on Ukraine? What commonalities can we find? Do our disagreements have any meaning in bring us to slightly different conclusions over stuff? I don't know. We're going to have a chat. That's going to be on my Tipping Philosopher channel, because there's a bit of a crossover there, and it's got a larger subscribership at the moment. So I'm going to put that one on there. But it's relevant to this channel. It could easily go on here. So please pop along and check that out. That's 9:30 tonight in British UK time. Probably 5 hours, so probably be 4:30 EST in America. But anyway, yeah, please check it out. Thank you so much for checking this video out. Please like, subscribe, and share. And in the meantime, see you later.